August 1, 2026. A Saturday. Just before 2:30 in the afternoon on Blue Lakes Boulevard in Twin Falls, Idaho. A small city of about 55,000 people, tucked into the southern edge of the state, roughly 120 miles southeast of Boise. The restaurant that was about to become the setting for what the local police chief would later describe as one of the most chaotic scenes his department had ever faced had opened its doors just a little over a week earlier. It was the very first In-N-Out in the entire state of Idaho, and because of that the crowd there was unreal. A drive-through line wrapped around the building, another line pouring out onto the sidewalk, people driving hours from other towns just to try the famous California burger they had never been able to get in their state before. A long-time dream had finally become real that summer. And it was exactly there, in the middle of that ordinary Saturday afternoon, with the sun burning bright outside, the smell of fresh fries drifting out of the kitchen and hundreds of happy customers waiting for their orders, that a 24-year-old man named Chad Williams pulled up outside, drew a firearm and started shooting. The final tally, once the sirens went quiet and the yellow tape went up around the parking lot, was this. 3 people dead, including a female In-N-Out employee who was doing her job like on any other shift. 7 people wounded, 2 of them in critical condition. The shooter himself ended his own life with a self-inflicted gunshot wound minutes later, right there on the edge of the property. And what could easily have been so much worse, a full-blown massacre inside a packed dining room, only did not happen because an off-duty Idaho State Police trooper and an ordinary armed citizen who happened to be nearby at that exact moment were both carrying, and both fired back, pushing Williams away from the crowded restaurant. Welcome back to another video here on the channel. If you are new around here and you like this kind of content, real crime cases, small-town tragedies, stories that the big networks cover for 2 days and then forget about, take a second to hit that subscribe button, drop a like, turn on notifications, and let me know down in the comments which case you want us to cover next. Every single source I am using in today's video is linked in the description, including reporting from CBS News, NBC News, Fox News, KTVB Idaho, East Idaho News, along with official statements from the Twin Falls Police Department and the FBI field office in Salt Lake City. Nothing here is my speculation or social media rumor. This is a reconstruction built on primary source journalism. Now, the question that has been hanging in the air since the moment the last shot was fired, and that still does not have an official answer as this video goes up, is a single one. What? Why that restaurant? Why that specific afternoon? Why those specific people that Chad Williams had never even met? He had no known connection to In-N-Out. He never worked there. He did not have a fight with an employee. He did not leave behind a public manifesto, at least not one that has surfaced in the first days of the investigation. He simply showed up, opened fire, got cornered by 2 armed men who fought back and killed himself. And he left an entire city, a shattered family and a country already numb to mass shootings asking, once again, what pushes a 24-year-old kid to turn a Saturday afternoon at a burger place into a massacre? In the next parts of this video we are going to reconstruct step by step exactly what happened that Saturday. How the most celebrated new restaurant in the state became a crime scene in less than 5 minutes. Who the victims were as far as the police have publicly released names. What is known about Chad Williams and more importantly, what remains a huge blank space in the official investigation. The role of the 2 armed men who fought back, especially the civilian identified by witnesses as Jordan Salinas, whose face-to-face standoff with the shooter went viral on social media within hours. The heartbroken response from In-N-Out president Lynsi Snyder. And the hard questions that the community of Twin Falls is now being forced to sit with, without answers. Stick around until the end because this story has layers that most of the short videos that raced online in the past few days simply did not have the time to show. To understand the weight of what happened on that Saturday, you first need to understand what In-N-Out means as a brand and, more importantly, what the opening of that specific location meant for the state of Idaho. In-N-Out is not just another burger chain. Founded back in 1948 in California by Harry and Esther Snyder, it built a cult following over the decades by refusing to franchise, by keeping a stripped-down menu, by paying employees well above minimum wage and by expanding at a pace that most fast food executives would find frankly insane. For decades, the chain was a California-only thing, a rite of passage for travelers who touched down at LAX and drove straight to the closest location. Slowly, over the years, it crept into Nevada, then Arizona, then Utah, then Texas. Each new state opening was treated like a small cultural event. People camped out. Local news sent live crews. Traffic collapsed. And for Idaho, that moment finally arrived in the summer of 2026, when the chain confirmed that Twin Falls was going to receive the very first In-N-Out in the state. Twin Falls itself is not a random dot on the map. It sits in the Magic Valley in the southern part of Idaho, close to the Snake River Canyon and the famous Perrine Bridge. About 55,000 people live there. The economy is a mix of agriculture, food processing, tourism from the canyon, and a growing tech and logistics sector that has been quietly attracting new residents from more expensive western states. It is the kind of place where people still know their neighbors, where the local news anchor is a familiar face, and where the arrival of a nationally known brand actually shifts the mood of the whole city. So when In-N-Out picked Twin Falls ahead of Boise, ahead of Idaho Falls, ahead of Coeur d'Alene, it was a genuine source of pride. The location on Blue Lakes Boulevard North is right on the main commercial artery of the city, surrounded by hotels, other restaurants, big box stores, and importantly, easy highway access. The store officially opened its doors just a little over a week before the shooting. And what happened in that first week was exactly what you would expect from any In-N-Out debut in a new state. Chaos. In a good way until it was not. People started lining up before sunrise on opening day. The drive-through wait, according to local reporting, stretched to 2, 3, sometimes 4 hours. Employees, most of them hired locally in the months before the opening, worked back-to-back shifts trying to keep up. The manager, according to accounts collected by regional press, said they were serving more burgers in a single day than some California locations serve in a full week. Twin Falls suddenly had one of the busiest new restaurants in the western United States, and it was on their block. By that Saturday, August 1st, the initial madness had settled a little. It was no longer a 4-hour wait to get a burger. But the location was still packed, still humming, still drawing families from all across southern Idaho and even from northern Nevada and eastern Oregon. Weekends were the busiest days. Saturday afternoons, in particular, were treated by the staff as game time. Every available register was open. The parking lot was full. The drive-thru had cars stacked bumper to bumper. Inside the dining room, families with kids in soccer uniforms sat next to older couples, next to teenagers filming their first double-double for TikTok, next to construction workers grabbing a late lunch after a morning shift. It was, in every possible sense, the picture of a normal, thriving American summer weekend. If you are enjoying this reconstruction so far and you want to help the channel grow, this is the moment to drop that like and hit subscribe. It really does make a difference and it is completely free for you. Now, one important detail before we move forward. Twin Falls is generally considered one of the safest cities of its size in Idaho. Violent crime is well below the national average. Mass shootings, in particular, were something that residents mostly watched on the national news, happening somewhere else to someone else. That sense of distance, that quiet feeling of this does not happen here, is exactly the psychological armor that was about to be blown apart in a matter of minutes. Because at some point on that Saturday afternoon in a vehicle parked somewhere along Blue Lakes Boulevard, or possibly arriving from a nearby side street, Chad Williams was already there. And he had already made whatever decision he had made. The countdown to the first gunshot was down to seconds. The exact minute-by-minute timeline of what happened at that In-N-Out is still, at the time of this recording, being pieced together by investigators. But based on the reporting from CBS News, NBC News, KTVB, East Idaho News and the official statements released by the Twin Falls Police Department, we can now walk through a fairly clear reconstruction. The shooting began at some point just before 2:30 in the afternoon. 2:30 on a Saturday in that specific location was one of the peak windows of the entire week. Lunch rush had extended into the early afternoon because of the crowds. There were, according to eyewitness accounts, dozens of customers inside the dining room, more sitting in cars along the drive-through lane, families walking in and out of the front doors, and staff running at full speed behind the counter and back in the kitchen. In other words, if someone wanted to maximize the number of potential victims and the amount of confusion, that was the perfect moment. According to the account given by Twin Falls Police Chief Matthew Hicks in the initial press briefing, Chad Williams did not walk into the restaurant, sit down, order food and then draw his firearm. That is an important detail. He did not attempt to blend in as a customer. The available evidence suggests that Williams began firing outside of the restaurant from the parking lot side, and that shots were directed both at people who were near the entrance and toward the drive-through area, where cars were sitting motionless in line and had no easy way to escape. This is one of the reasons the death toll was concentrated so quickly. People inside cars, unable to move because of the line ahead of them, and people walking to and from the front door, were the most immediately exposed. The first sounds inside the restaurant were, according to witnesses interviewed later by local media, initially confused with something else. A pop, then another pop. Some employees briefly thought it was firecrackers, or a truck backfiring on the boulevard. Then the screams started, and it became unmistakably clear that something violent was happening right outside the front windows. One of the residents in the surrounding area, a 43-year-old woman named Haley Dodaro, described to reporters what she saw from her own vantage point. She saw people running away from the restaurant in all directions, and she described seeing employees, still in their white in-and-out uniforms and red aprons, running out of the building crying and screaming. That single image of teenagers and young adults in that iconic uniform, pouring out of the emergency exit in tears, is what stuck with a lot of local residents after that day. Inside the dining room, the reaction split, as it usually does in these situations, into two waves. The first wave, closest to the front doors and the drive-through windows, tried to run. Some made it out through the side exit, some made it to the back of the kitchen, some sheltered behind the counter and under tables. The second wave, further inside or already at the registers, froze. That freezing response is well documented in psychology of active shooter events, and it is not a matter of cowardice. It is a wired-in nervous system response when the brain cannot immediately process what it is hearing. Staff members, according to accounts collected by the police in the following hours, did what they had been trained to do in the very brief active shooter briefings that had become standard even for fast food employees in the United States. They ushered customers away from the windows, they moved people toward the back of the store, they called 911. While all of this was happening in the span of what might have been 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, two other people in that parking lot were making a completely different decision. They were not running away. They were not freezing. They were both reaching for their own concealed carry weapons, and they were both moving toward the sound of the gunfire. One of them was an off-duty Idaho State Police trooper whose name has not been publicly released by his department. The other one was a civilian, later identified by multiple witnesses and by widely circulated social media video as a local resident named Jordan Salinas. What those two men did in the next few minutes is, according to the Twin Falls police chief himself, the single most important reason why the number of dead did not end up being closer to 10, 15, or worse. And that is the part of this story that turned an already national headline into something people were still talking about days later. And that is exactly where we are going in the next block. The cell phone video that spread across social media within hours of the shooting is, in many ways, the reason this specific case attracted so much national attention so quickly. Because unlike so many other mass shooting scenes in recent American history, this one was captured, at least in part, on video. And what that video appeared to show was not just chaos and running. It showed a lone armed civilian actually walking toward the shooter, weapon drawn, exchanging gunfire in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant. That kind of footage is extremely rare. Most active shooter events either happen too fast for anyone to film them at all, or the only footage available is grainy security camera video released weeks later. Here, someone with a cell phone was rolling almost from the beginning. And what that footage captured was the moment that Jordan Salinas, or the person that multiple witnesses would identify as Jordan Salinas, decided to intervene. Let me be very careful and honest about what has and has not been officially confirmed, because a lot of what is circulating online is more than what the police have actually said on the record. The Twin Falls Police Department, at the time of this recording, has not officially released the name of the armed civilian who helped stop the shooting. Chief Matthew Hicks, in his press briefing, thanked and praised the citizen but referred to him only as an armed citizen who reacted heroically. The identification of that citizen as Jordan Salinas came from multiple witnesses on the scene, from people who recognized him in the video, from posts made by local residents, and from statements attributed to family and friends after the videos went viral. It is a strong identification backed by multiple sources, but until the police confirm it on the record, we should treat it as strong witness identification, not as official confirmation. That distinction matters when we are trying to keep this reconstruction accurate. Now, with that caveat firmly in place, here is what the cell phone footage and witness reporting collectively appear to show. As Williams was firing, the armed citizen, identified as Salinas, drew his own handgun. According to some initial reports circulating in the days after, that handgun may have been equipped with a suppressor, though again, that specific detail has not been officially confirmed by police and should be treated with caution. What the footage does clearly show is a man moving in the direction of the gunfire while other people are running away. He is seen advancing across the parking lot, taking cover briefly, and then continuing to close the distance on the shooter. At one point in the video, he appears to stumble or dive into some landscaping bushes near the property line, then get back up and continue to press forward. At roughly the same time, from a different angle of the parking lot, the off-duty Idaho State Police trooper had also drawn his own weapon and was engaging Williams. So Williams, who had started this attack with the massive tactical advantage of surprise and of firing on unarmed people in a soft target, suddenly found himself caught in a two-front gunfight. Two people, moving in from different directions, both trained to some degree in the use of a firearm, both willing to close the distance. That single tactical shift, in the words of Chief Hicks, is what drove Williams away from the restaurant itself. If those two men had not been present and armed at that exact moment, it is very likely that Williams would have continued firing into the still crowded dining room. And the death toll, instead of ending at 3, could have been catastrophically higher. Here is a quick note before we continue. If you are watching this all the way through and finding this reconstruction useful, please take a second and drop a like on the video and leave a comment. It genuinely helps the channel reach other people who care about serious reporting on these cases. Also worth pointing out here, and this is something that has already started a very heated national debate, is the fact that this incident is being cited by a growing number of commentators and public officials as a very rare, very concrete example of a so-called good guy with a gun stopping, or at least significantly reducing, an active shooter event. That debate is not going to be settled by this video, but we cannot tell the story of what happened at that In-N-Out without acknowledging that it is now part of the national conversation. What we can do is stick to what actually happened next, minute by minute, and that is where we go now. According to the official statement given by Chief Matthew Hicks in the initial press conference, the exchange of fire between Chad Williams, the off-duty state trooper, and the civilian believed to be Jordan Salinas is what fundamentally changed the direction of the attack. Up until that point, Williams had been the one dictating the terms of the encounter. He was choosing the targets. He was choosing where to fire. He was choosing how quickly to move. That advantage evaporated the moment he started taking incoming rounds from two different directions. In active shooter dynamics, this is actually a well-documented pattern. The overwhelming majority of active shooters, and this is backed up by decades of FBI research, plan their attacks around the assumption that they will face no armed resistance until law enforcement finally arrives, and they typically end the attack one way or another at the moment that resistance shows up. Some surrender. Many, and this includes Williams, take their own lives. Very few keep fighting once someone starts shooting back. Williams, once he was being fired upon, moved away from the front of the restaurant. According to the police account, he retreated across the parking area and toward the perimeter of the property. Exactly how many rounds were exchanged between the three shooters is a detail the police have not publicly disclosed, likely because forensic reconstruction of shell casings and bullet trajectories is still ongoing. What is confirmed is that at some point in that movement, at some point after being confronted, Chad Williams turned his firearm on himself. The Twin Falls Police Department has stated, and this has been confirmed by multiple outlets including CBS News, that Williams died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. His body was found on or immediately adjacent to the property, not deep inside the dining room and not far from the location where he had initially begun firing. That final act, the self-inflicted gunshot, is significant for a lot of reasons. Practically, it meant that the immediate threat was over. It meant that the two armed men could stand down. It meant that emergency medical response could finally move into the danger zone and start treating the wounded. But it also meant something much heavier for the families and for the investigators. It meant that any hope of ever getting a full accounting of why this location, why this day, why these people died with him. Chad Williams did not leave behind, at least as far as investigators have publicly stated, a written manifesto, a video recording, a suicide note explaining his reasoning, or a public social media post declaring his intentions. He simply stopped. And with him, so did the possibility of ever hearing the reasoning in his own words. Within minutes, the parking lot of that In-N-Out was flooded with Twin Falls Police Department units, Twin Falls Fire Department paramedics, Idaho State Police units, and very quickly after, additional support from surrounding jurisdictions in the Magic Valley. The scene was secured, a perimeter was set up, and the very difficult work of triage began. Some of the wounded were treated on site in the parking lot itself, before being loaded into ambulances. Others were rushed directly to St. Luke's Magic Valley Medical Center, which is the primary trauma facility in that region. Of the 7 wounded, according to the official update given by the police in the hours after the shooting, 2 were in critical condition, 3 were in stable condition, and 2 were treated and released relatively quickly. The 3 fatalities, aside from Chad Williams himself, were officially confirmed dead at the scene or shortly after arrival at the hospital. The names of those 3 victims, out of respect for the families, were not immediately released by the police. What was released, and what was later confirmed by the corporate leadership of In-N-Out itself, was that at least one of the 3 fatalities was a female employee of the restaurant. A young woman, one of the associates who had been hired locally to help open this brand new location, who had taken a shift on that Saturday afternoon like on any other weekend, and who never made it home. In the world of In-N-Out, employees are famously referred to internally as associates, and that word matters in what happened next. Because within hours of the shooting being confirmed, the person at the very top of the company, someone who typically stays very far away from the public spotlight, decided that she had to speak. Her name is Lynsi Snyder, and what she said and how she said it is where we are going next. Lynsi Snyder is, for anyone who does not know the corporate history of In-N-Out, the granddaughter of the founders and the current president of the entire company. She is the sole heir of the Snyder family fortune, one of the youngest women ever to run a major American restaurant chain, and she has spent most of her career deliberately staying out of the spotlight. She rarely gives interviews. She almost never comments on national news events. She is deeply religious, quietly involved in the day-to-day operations of the chain, and the internal culture that she has helped protect at In-N-Out is famously family-oriented. Employees are not called employees. They are called associates. The company runs annual retreats, personal recognition programs, and pays wages that consistently sit at the top of the fast food industry. For many of the young people working the fryers, the counters and the registers at the Twin Falls location, working at In-N-Out was a genuinely coveted job. Which is exactly why, when the news broke that one of those associates had been shot and killed on the property, Snyder chose to break her usual silence. In a statement released to the press and shared on the company's official channels within hours of the incident, Snyder wrote, and this is a direct quote, "My heart is broken, my chest is heavy, my eyes burn from the tears I've shed. We lost one of our beautiful associates tonight. She was taking care of our most important asset, our customers, and her life was taken by a disgusting human who doesn't value the lives of others or his own." That statement, that specific wording, coming from someone who almost never speaks publicly, hit differently than the standard corporate condolence template that we have all become numb to reading in the wake of American mass shootings. Snyder went further. In the same statement, she described what happened by saying that the gunman shot both on our property and off, and ended his life shortly after he took the precious lives of our associate and customers, innocent people who never saw it coming. She also wrote that In-N-Out will be mourning with the families and praying for them as they tread through a very painful season, and that her heart also goes out to all of the associates and customers who were there during this traumatic event. Read together, that statement is not the kind of thing a legal department drafts. It reads like something a grieving family member wrote, because in the very specific culture that In-N-Out has cultivated, that is essentially the position Lynsi Snyder holds relative to her staff. The associate who died in Twin Falls was, in the emotional logic of the company, family. The In-N-Out Corporation announced very quickly that the Twin Falls location would be closed indefinitely as a mark of respect, to allow for the police investigation to continue, and to give the surviving staff the time they needed. Grief counselors were brought in for the employees. Support was extended, according to the company, to the families of the deceased and the wounded. Local churches and community organizations in Twin Falls opened their doors for prayer vigils. A memorial began to form outside the closed restaurant almost immediately. Flowers, candles, handwritten notes, teddy bears left by strangers who had never met the victims but who wanted the families to know that the city was mourning with them. It was, in every visible way, the classic American small-town response to a tragedy that lands directly in its own backyard. Real quick, if this reconstruction is delivering something to you that the shorter news clips did not, please leave a comment down below. It helps a lot with the algorithm and it lets us know what kinds of cases you want us to keep covering. Now, while all of that grieving was happening on the public surface, a completely separate operation was unfolding in parallel. Behind the police tape, in a coordination room somewhere in the Twin Falls Police Department, and in a Salt Lake City office belonging to the FBI, investigators were beginning the very difficult work of trying to reconstruct not just what Chad Williams did, but who Chad Williams actually was. Because if we cannot ask him why he did it, the only way to even get close to an answer is to reverse engineer his life, his family, his movements, his digital footprint, his mental state in the days and weeks leading up to that Saturday. And that is where the story shifts from the tragedy of what happened to the mystery of who he was. Here is the honest truth about the investigation into Chad Williams as of the recording of this video. Very little has been publicly released, and there is a real reason for that. In an active federal investigation, the FBI and the local police department have to be extremely careful about what they say publicly. Anything they release can compromise interviews they still need to conduct, can tip off potential witnesses, or can give ammunition to defense attorneys down the line if any charges do end up being filed against anyone else. In this specific case, since Chad Williams is dead, there will be no criminal prosecution of him. But there could still be an investigation into whether anyone else knew what he was planning, whether anyone provided him with the firearm illegally, or whether there were digital footprints on private platforms that need to be preserved through formal legal process before they can be discussed in public. That is why what we are hearing officially is thin, and what we are hearing unofficially on social media is enormous. What has been officially confirmed is this: Chad Williams was 24 years old. He acted alone. His family is cooperating with the investigation. In the words of the Twin Falls Police Department, his family's hearts are also broken during this time. That single sentence, buried inside an otherwise procedural police statement, is one of the most quietly heavy details of this entire case. Because it tells us that whoever the parents of Chad Williams are, whoever his siblings are, whoever the extended relatives are, they are now living inside a nightmare that no family ever plans for. They are grieving a young man they raised, while at the same time being publicly linked to the deaths of 3 innocent people. That is a form of grief with no clean map. And the fact that they immediately opened up to investigators, rather than lawyering up and shutting down, suggests either that they had absolutely no warning that this was coming, or that they were desperate in the aftermath to help authorities understand it themselves. The FBI's Salt Lake City field office, which has jurisdictional responsibility for federal support in Idaho, was activated almost immediately. Special Agent Robert Bowles publicly confirmed that the Bureau had deployed its full resources to assist Twin Falls PD with the investigation. That means, in practice, federal agents helping to reconstruct any digital communications Williams may have had, examining any weapons he legally or illegally acquired, tracing his movements in the days and weeks leading up to the shooting, interviewing acquaintances, co-workers, former classmates, and anyone else who might have interacted with him in the recent past. All of that work takes weeks, sometimes months. And in some cases, in mass shooter investigations, we do not get a public accounting of the motive until a full year or more after the event, when a formal after-action report or a congressional hearing forces the information into the open. In the absence of official information, a very predictable thing happens. Social media fills the vacuum. Within hours of the shooter's name being released, alleged screenshots of alleged social media accounts belonging to Chad Williams were being circulated across platforms. Some of these were quickly debunked as accounts belonging to completely different people who happened to share the name. Some were removed by the platforms themselves. Some are still floating around in less moderated corners of the internet. This is one of the reasons I want to be very careful in this reconstruction. There is a real risk in a case like this one of amplifying misinformation and worse, of publicly attaching the wrong faces and the wrong personal histories to the actions of a shooter who is now dead and cannot correct the record. Until the FBI or Twin Falls PD officially confirms specific biographical details, aliases, or online activity, I am not going to speculate about them on this channel. What we do know for sure is that Williams was not on the radar of law enforcement in any way that has been publicly disclosed. He was not, according to any public statement so far, on a terrorism watch list. He was not, as far as we know, subject to any active restraining orders, mental health commitments, or prior criminal investigations that would have flagged him as a threat, which places him in a category that has become, unfortunately, extremely familiar in American mass shooting cases. The lone young man who slips through every possible warning system, sometimes because those warning systems failed and sometimes because there was genuinely nothing there for them to catch, until the day he decides to act. And that is the pattern that pulls this specific tragedy directly into a much bigger national conversation, which is exactly where we go next. In the days after the shooting, the Twin Falls In-N-Out incident quickly stopped being just a local Idaho tragedy and became a national talking point, for several reasons that are worth walking through in order. The first is the sheer visibility of the case. A shooting inside a beloved and heavily trafficked new restaurant, with viral cell phone footage of an armed citizen intervening, hits every possible ingredient for national coverage. The second is the identity of the target itself. In-N-Out is one of the most emotionally loved brands in American food culture. When it becomes the setting of a mass casualty event, that hits harder than a shooting at a nameless location, because millions of people have personally been inside one of those dining rooms. And the third is the ongoing debate over armed citizens, concealed carry, and the appropriate response to active shooter events, which is a debate that this incident poured gasoline directly onto. Let us address that debate honestly because it is important, and this reconstruction would not be complete without it. The Twin Falls police chief himself, in an official capacity, publicly credited the off-duty state trooper and the armed civilian with helping to prevent further casualties. That is not a talking point from a lobbying group. That is a serving law enforcement official on the record, giving credit to armed intervention. Second Amendment advocates in the days following the shooting seized on that statement as concrete evidence of the good guy with a gun argument, and Jordan Salinas, or the person identified as him, became something close to a national folk hero in certain corners of the internet, with fundraisers, tribute videos and merchandise appearing within days. On the other side of the argument, critics have pointed out several things. That the shooting still killed 3 people and wounded 7, and that armed intervention did not prevent those deaths, only prevented further ones. That most attempts by armed civilians to intervene in active shootings historically go badly, with the citizen often being killed or accidentally hitting bystanders. That Idaho's permissive concealed carry laws are precisely what allowed Chad Williams to acquire and carry his own firearm in the first place. Both sides of that argument are being made, and both sides have data points from this specific incident that they can point to. The other layer of national conversation that got activated by this shooting is the discussion around fast food workers as victims of workplace violence. This is a much less discussed statistic in the United States, but fast food and retail workers actually face significantly higher rates of on-the-job violence than most other American workers. The associate who died at that In-N-Out was not, as far as any reporting suggests, personally targeted by Chad Williams. She was killed because she happened to be at her workplace on the day someone decided to attack it. That reality that going to your teenage or early 20s job at a burger place could now potentially expose you to a mass casualty event is something that a lot of American families are quietly sitting with in the days after this news broke. Parents whose kids work at fast food, at grocery stores, at movie theaters, are having versions of the same conversation at kitchen tables all over the country. And then there is the question that will probably never be fully answered, which is the question of what Chad Williams was actually thinking. Was this ideologically motivated? Was this an act of personal grievance? Was this a psychotic break, unrelated to any coherent motive? Was this an attention-seeking act, driven by the visibility of previous mass shootings and the twisted incentive structure of infamy that our media environment sometimes creates? In the absence of a manifesto, in the absence of a suicide note, in the absence of any statement he made public before the attack, the honest answer is that we do not know, and there is a real possibility that we never will know with certainty. Some future FBI report may fill in some of the gaps, may point to specific search history, may identify specific ideological rabbit holes, may quote specific texts or messages he sent in the hours or days before the attack. Some of that will probably eventually come out. Some of it never will. And the family, the community, the survivors and the memory of the 3 people who died there will have to figure out how to keep living while carrying that permanent question mark. Which brings us to the closing part of this video. If you are watching this from outside the United States, this pattern probably feels almost surreal. The mass shooting event, followed by the emotional community grieving, followed by the political debate, followed by the fading of the story from national headlines within about 10 to 14 days, followed by the next one. That cycle has repeated itself so many times in this country over the past 2 decades that most Americans can predict, almost to the day, what stage of the cycle they are currently in. The shooting at the In-N-Out in Twin Falls will follow that cycle too. It is following it already. And for the families of the 3 people who died there, that is one of the cruelest parts of this whole thing. Because for them this is not stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 of a national news cycle. For them, it is the permanent before and after line of their entire lives. The associate who was killed, whose name at the time of this recording has not been publicly released out of respect for her family, was a young woman who went to work on a Saturday. She was doing what millions of teenagers and young adults in this country do, working a shift at a food service job. She may have been saving up for college. She may have been paying rent. She may have been contributing to a family income. She may have loved her coworkers, loved the discount on the food, loved the small daily rituals of that specific job. All of that ended in a parking lot in Twin Falls at some point after 2:30 on August 1st. The 2 customers who were killed, whose names have also not been publicly released, showed up that day for what should have been one of the most banal, forgettable, easy interactions of an average weekend. Lunch at a burger place. That is it. And that was the last thing they ever did. There are also the 7 wounded, some of whom, as of this recording, are still fighting for their lives in intensive care at St. Luke's Magic Valley. There are the untold number of people who were physically unharmed but who watched this happen from 3 feet away, and who are now processing a level of trauma that will follow them for years, potentially decades. There are the employees who ran out of that restaurant crying, in their uniforms, past the parking lot and past the drive-through lane and past bodies on the pavement. There is the off-duty state trooper, who is now living with the memory of a gunfight in a fast food parking lot on his day off. There is Jordan Salinas, or whoever the armed civilian actually was, who now has to sit with the knowledge that he pulled the trigger of a firearm at another human being, in defense of strangers, and who will carry that experience with him regardless of how much online adoration he receives. And then there is the family of Chad Williams. That is the group that almost no one wants to talk about, but that this reconstruction would be incomplete without acknowledging. They lost their son too, under the worst possible circumstances. And they are now living inside a public grief that they cannot control, cannot correct, and cannot escape. Their cooperation with law enforcement, their choice not to hide, their apparent willingness to help investigators try to understand what their son did and why, is probably one of the most quietly dignified responses that a family in their position could give. That does not erase what he did. Nothing can erase what he did. But it deserves to be named honestly in this reconstruction. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, seriously, thank you. It genuinely matters. Please drop that like if you have not already, hit subscribe if you are new around here, and let me know down in the comments what you think about this case. Do you believe the presence of armed citizens made this outcome less bad than it would have otherwise been? Do you think we will eventually learn Chad Williams' motive? What do you think the community of Twin Falls should do next? All of the sources used for this reconstruction are linked in the video description, along with links to any verified fundraisers for the victims and their families as they become available. Take care of the people in your life. Be gentle with your neighbors. And I will see you in the next video.